Um, okay, let me just get the agenda in front of me. There we are. Okay, so we'll open the meeting, take a roll call, and then get started. So pursuant to general laws, chapter 30A, section 20B, chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, permitting public bodies to conduct meetings remotely, the Cohasset Advisory Committee will meet virtually utilizing the Zoom platform. All votes will be taken by a roll call vote. We'll call the roll as it exists right now. Gina Stino.
Present.
Rand Collins.
Present.
Mark Maggi.
Present. And you got it right.
Yes, finally. Mary McGoldrick.
Present.
Meg Wheeler.
Present.
And Rob Hillman present. Okay, so the agenda's been circulated and some material. The major agenda item has to do with completing a review of articles for the special town meeting warrant. A updated version of the warrant with wet ink, if we still lived in that world, was just emailed to you moments ago, which is changed a little bit from the warrant that was previously circulated, and in part by striking an article, which is good. I was not present at the last meeting we had. I understand that articles 1 through 4 were reviewed and subject to votes. Of the articles that are before us this evening, 2 of them have to do with proposed zoning changes. Patrick, good evening. We just called to order. I forgot you're taking minutes, so the minutes can reflect that we opened the meeting at about 7:03, and those on the call presently were present when it opened. In order to do this efficiently and effectively, we'd like Lauren Lynn to be able to participate, to talk to us about the zoning articles. There'll be other participants addressing those as well before we discuss them. Lauren has a hearing a little later this evening, so we thought that it would make sense to start with those articles to give us enough time to talk with her and then let her get to that hearing in time for it to begin. I think the way in which it makes sense, given the time constraints, to proceed would be to have Lauren address both of the articles relating to zoning. That would be Article 6, changes to residential zoning definitions, and Article 7, ledge protection, and then to invite their presentation from the zoning working group would like to address us on those issues. I'll take a motion for each of the 2 articles, and if those motions are seconded, we'll have a discussion, and if any members have questions or further questions, particularly for the members of the group, they can ask them at that point. Obviously, if people have questions when Lauren finishes the discussion, in order to kind of help her on her way to her next event, we can have some questions there too. For what it's worth, though it certainly shouldn't limit our discussion of all these issues, I have a hard stop around 9 o'clock where I have to cease to be the member of a board and go and be a lawyer for a board in another place. But it wouldn't affect a quorum if I had to do so, and hopefully we'll be able to get where we need to go prior to 9 o'clock or 9:15. So with that, why don't we turn our attention to Article 6 and Article 7. And unless Chris has anything by way of preface, I'd invite Lauren to sort of describe to the to the committee what these articles set out to do, and procedurally how the planning board dealt with them and where they are in front of us. Lauren?
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lauren Lind, and I'm the planning director in town. So it's nice to see some of you again, and also nice to see some new faces this year. I'll begin with just some background information about the process for the zoning articles this year. Originally, there were 3 articles that were brought forth as proposed articles for a special town meeting. These were the result of work of several months by the zoning bylaw working group, which is a offset of our master plan implementation committee. Several months ago, they began informally first starting to come to the planning board to vocalize these issues. And then formally, we began a public hearing process as noticed by state statute and all the sort of process that we typically go through leading into a town meeting cycle. The planning board opened public hearings on 3 articles on October 13th. They were continued to October 20th, during which the planning board closed the hearings and took action on the 3. The first article, which was known as the single lot exemption, was recommended to be sent back to the zoning bylaw working group for further study. So that article is no longer moving forward for the special town meeting process. Therefore, you don't see it in the warrant that you have before you. The second article that was brought forth to the planning board was the changes to definitions, which is now known as Article 6. The intent of this article is to modify 4 existing definitions and add 6 new definitions into our zoning bylaws as it pertains to residential land use zoning and particularly access, thinking about things like common drive and private roadway access. The intent behind this bylaw change is to, 1, clarify some inconsistencies and also add language that doesn't presently exist in our bylaw. The zoning bylaw working group did use and reference state statutes. So these definitions were not just arbitrarily made up. They were backed by state guidance as well as what other communities have done. And the intent here is to give our zoning enforcement officer, who is our building inspector, his name is John Hallen. He is the enforcement officer for all of sort of the zoning and items that happen under land use. And these definitions will essentially give him more tools in his toolkit to more effectively do his job when it comes to enforcement. The planning board voted 4 in favor, 1 opposed, to favorably recommend that this move forward to town meeting. The second article that is before you tonight, known as Article 7, is it's a ledge protection article, and it's viewed as a step 2, phase 2 of the land alteration, which you may remember passed at annual town meeting of last year. The land protection article that was passed at annual town meeting really focused on lot clearing and tree protection. And what this article does is it's exposed ledge face. And what the article is proposing is to add a new section to the bylaw that would establish a special permit process before the planning board for exposed ledge face removal for accessory structures, which are things such as pools, sheds, items that are not inherently attached to what would be a primary dwelling, a building structure of that nature. And the intent behind this article is to speak to a sentiment that we were hearing from the community in terms of preserving community character and the destruction of ledge face removal that people were feeling was perhaps having a destructive impact on the character of the community. So this was a response to that. The planning board voted unanimously 5-0 to recommend favorably that this article move forward for town meeting this year. So I will pause there. I know that the zoning bylaw working group does have a presentation that they'd like to share some more detailed information with you about their process and the recommendations. I also have available the language if it's useful to share. So please, Mr. Hillman, let me know how you'd like to proceed.
I believe that the language that was provided to me, I'm sorry, I'm getting an echo. If is anyone else hearing me twice? You are?
Yes.
Try this. Is that any better?
That's better.
Good.
Oh, Patrick's shaking his head no, though.
I'm sorry.
Patrick shook his head no, but it was better for me.
I'll do my
Yeah,
best.
better here.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better now.
All right. In short, the members of the committee have received the red line draft with comments from the working group with the details of the changes and the changes as they're marked up and shown in the current warrant as attachments. Those are not in red line form. But I think we've got the base material, which is good. I think perhaps we should, unless any members of the committee have a question right now for you, we should perhaps let the working group I asked them for about 10 minutes or so, what, the amount of time they need to get it across. And then if members have questions for either the working group or for Lauren, we can ask those while she's available. So Chris, can you promote Katie Dugan? Well, Zoom promote.
Hello.
Hi, good evening. So you were on listening when Lauren gave a quick summary of the two articles?
I was, yes.
Great.
We've been tag teaming at several meetings now, so this is a.
I know that's the case. So why don't you go ahead and
I'd love
give us
to,
what
if possible,
we need to know.
Rob, promote other members of the working group if that's appropriate, just so that they can participate if possible, if you don't mind.
I'm happy to have them available to participate, but I don't anticipate this becoming sort of a, if they're available to answer questions, if there are members of your group who are better situated to answer questions that the committee may have, I'm happy to have them. I don't want to necessarily have a lengthy open forum, but promote away.
That'd be great. Thank you, Chris. If you can promote Woody Chittick, Jack Creighton, Cassie Malatesta, and Peter Pescatori, and I will be speaking, but in case I miss a point that's important or there's a clarification, just would like them available.
Also, Katie, and I may just be out in front of you by one question, but if you're promoting them into this meeting, don't you have to open your meeting?
I do.
Okay, and the floor is yours.
All right. I'd like to call to order the zoning bylaw working group on November 3rd, 2021. Present Katie Dugan, Woody Chittick,
Woody Chittick, present.
Peter Pescatori. Present. Jack Creighton.
Jack Creighton, present.
All right, thank you. I'm calling us to order at 7:15. All right, I believe I've been made a co-host and I can share. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You gave us 10 minutes, so I'm going to move quickly and expediently, and I'll take questions at the end. I think is probably the most efficient way. So just
think of 10 minutes as a guideline rather than a stopwatch. I mean, if you need a little bit more time,
okay.
Feel free. I just want to keep us within Lauren's schedule and in the same neighborhood as our agenda. So
no,
go right ahead.
I appreciate that. I'll try not to speed talk too quickly. So we did want to spend just 2 points. One, go over some basic principles and goals that we've been using as a working group as we've been approaching any of the zoning work that we brought forward at annual town meeting and at special town meeting this fall, along with what we'll be using going forward as a part of a broader zoning redraft and reorganization that's outlined in the master plan, and then quickly give you some additional background material as it relates to the two proposed articles, working group 2, which is now Article 6, and working group 3, which is now Article 7. So thank you again for the time. I should note that the zoning bylaw working group has been working closely with new town council and land council Carolyn Murray at KP Law, and she's attended several of our meetings and done detailed reviews of both of those, and also participated in the planning board hearings that took place in October that Lauren referenced to. So just some quick overview as to how we approach zoning and how we think about the zoning overhauls. So just to kind of lay out broadly what the state allows and gives authority to towns. Towns are able to regulate the use of land and buildings and structures under Mass General Law 40A, the Zoning Act. which was put in place in 1975. And I think it's important for everybody just to recognize up front that there are some purposes of zoning that are enumerated in that act that are important and often come up when we are talking about master plan and the zoning strategies there. One of the zoning purposes is to lessen congestion in the streets, to conserve health and safety, to prevent the overcrowding of the land, to encourage the most appropriate use of land, including considerations and recommendations from the master plan, and to conserve the value of land and buildings. So that's kind of at a high level, the guidance that the State Zoning Act gives us. And then as a community, we have our master plan, which guides us further. So I did want to step back because it is important for us to understand where we started. The master plan process actually started back in 2016 as commissioned by the planning board at the time to do a phase 1 visioning. And this was run by the MAPC and included quite a bit of public input. And during that phase 1 visioning process in 2016, we heard quite a bit as it relates to land use, open space, and housing. And we have used this slide and several others to kind of summarize what we believe we heard from the public as it relates to land use. And the way the zoning bylaw working group summarizes that is that there was consensus around the need to manage growth, the fact that the town has begun to feel overcrowded, that there needed to be balance in the scale of housing, of the houses relative to the neighborhoods and the lot sizes, that there needed to be a better understanding on behalf of the community of the build out potential of the remaining undeveloped lots, that there was an overall sentiment to protect open space, and then last but not least, the need to promote a range of housing types, in particular as it relates to smaller format, younger families, moderate affordable housing. So that is the public input that we got in phase 1. Which then in phase 2, which was the actual master plan process, which ran from 2017 through June of 2019, which produced the 9-chapter master plan. And what I've highlighted here for you is actually one of the key chapters as it relates to zoning, which is land use. And I further highlighted the first goal in that chapter, which was to plan and invest strategically for smart growth in order to preserve Cohasset's community character. And that's kind of the overarching goal in land use. And then underneath that, there were actually two additional goals and a number of sub-strategies. But the one that I would highlight that's relevant to the work of the zoning bylaw working group and is really kind of fundamental to our charge, which is strategy 1.4, which requests us to review and revise the zoning bylaws to ensure the desired smart growth and enforcement of zoning bylaws. So that's the backdrop of the work that we have begun and been working on for the last 15 months at the direction of the planning board, but also the master plan implementation committee and the select board. So with that, I'm going to jump into what is Article 6 background, which is changes to zoning definitions. And so I wanted to sort of set the table again in terms of how did we approach the changes to zoning definitions. And Laura laid out some of the general premises, but one of the key things that we focused on when it came to changes to zoning definitions was the principle that any bylaw change we were making was an opportunity to bring some of our definitions, particularly as it relates to residential zoning, into harmony with state law. What we mean by that is both state statutory law, but in many cases, case law, which builds up a body of knowledge around how zoning is enforced in the state of Massachusetts. And we focus particularly in on what the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court has articulated in terms of the 4 standards that must be met in order for a parcel to become a buildable lot in which a new home can be placed on. And these 4 criteria were: 1, that all lots meet the residential area dimension requirements from the town zoning bylaws, that the lots must abut a qualified way, that the lots must all have adequate frontage on a qualified way, and last but not least, that there be adequate and practical access from a qualified way to each of these lots. And so the overall premise and core was that we were trying to make sure that our zoning definitions built up a foundation and a framework which the planning board and our zoning enforcement officer, who's also our building inspector, could use to ensure that our lots and our buildings were being built on what was considered truly a buildable lot. So with that, we also performed quite a bit of analysis to back up the recommendations. And what we learned from that is that Cohasset is not always unique, but in many cases, we are outlier on many aspects as it relates to residential zoning definitions and dimensions. And one of the reasons that we posit that perhaps we are a bit out of step with the 24 towns that we benchmarked against is that it's been 35 years since we've actually had a comprehensive zoning redraft in town. And as a result, while other communities may have modified and moved their definitions or their dimensional requirements in different directions, Cohasset, for all intensive purposes, has remained quite static. And so just to kind of assure you, we did analyze 24 towns, and we looked at both the dimensional categories that are laid out in the box on the left, but we also looked at residential definitions. And then on the right, we did additional work in terms of thinking through and benchmarking what is required under adequate access. And that meant reviewing research from the Department of Housing and Community Development, other pamphlets that have been put out by the individuals on streets and ways. And then last but not least, we did a deep dive on 2 towns who have taken 2 different but important approaches in terms of regulating adequate access. Plymouth, where they've taken a bylaw approach, and Wellesley, where they've taken a rules and regulations approach, which has been backstopped by changes in their definitions in order to ensure that adequate access is being provided when new dwellings are being built on private ways. So that is the background and the benchmarking that we performed. So this is just a visual of what Lauren laid out for you earlier, that we have in our Article 6 proposal. There are 4 revised definitions for frontage, street / way, lot, and common driveway. And then we've added 6 new definitions for parcel, buildable lot, legal frontage, qualified way, non-qualified way, and adequate access. And what we've done here, just kind of visually, is that the top 3 at the top that are in the blue box actually correlate to what would be considered a parcel, which is an undeveloped lot, and doesn't necessarily meet buildable standards. It can or it can't. It's just a parcel which is on a way and has frontage. And then what's in the orange box is really kind of the critical piece from a land use perspective, which is what is considered a lot or a buildable lot under state statutes, under case law, and under the SJC standards. And so what we're proposing here is a package that has the support of the building inspector to provide definitions that are more closely tied to what we believe are important elements in order to ensure that we're taking steps to make sure that our land use follows in line with what is considered buildable under state law. And then lastly, this is just kind of a quick summary from our perspective, the zoning bylaw working group's perspective, as to why we believe that these zoning changes are important. We believe that Article 6 is important because it will ensure that the future development of buildable lots complies with state law and case law. We believe that this will provide definitional changes that will help the planning board, the ZBA, the town's building inspector in the review and approval of building permits, special permits, A&R, site plans, and other definitive plans. It will eliminate ambiguity to ensure that undeveloped parcels that are being developed have clear standards for what's considered a buildable lot under our zoning bylaws. And then last but not least, there is an underlying land use issue regarding adequate access and safety on private ways when a new dwelling is added. And the bylaw definition changes have added provisions to allow the planning board to regulate common driveways, which they already do, and add in the future potentially regulations to govern private way dimensions and constructions if the planning board so desires that would complement what already exists for common driveways and what already complements what already exists for subdivision standard private ways. So that is the rationale for Article 6. I'm now going to move on to Article 7 and just give you a little bit of background as it relates to ledge protection. So I think all of you appreciate that there was quite a bit of discussion and input as it relates to the broader land alteration article that passed in the spring for Article 11. And as Lauren laid out, this at the time really added a new provision related to clearing activities. What we were asked by the community was to research and think further about whether there was a way to add to that in a phase 2. And we have come back with a proposal to add an addendum to Article 11, which allows for the protection of exposed ledge face. So in the time between annual town meeting and now, we've analyzed 8 examples of development or potential development that the community identified where there was concern about exposed ledge face being removed. We've also worked with town council to review what are the statutory provisions that allow any town in Massachusetts to actually govern and regulate the removal of soil, loam, gravel, or other earthen materials, and have gotten assurances from her that we are able to regulate this in a more significant manner than we had previously believed we were able to. And then last but not least, with the help of new town council, we've actually identified 2 towns that have successfully put in place specific ledge protection. One is Manchester by the Sea, and the second is Rockport. And the reason there are a couple of reasons that we thought this was important. One is that we were able to see how these communities not only approach the regulation, but more importantly, what they considered exempt activities. And then we also were able to take confidence that if we were using this as a potential template or some guidelines, we felt that we could successfully pass state AG review with our proposed ledge protection. What we learned from the Manchester by the Sea and the Rockport examples are, one, that they were very specific in exempting activities as it relates to construction of the primary dwelling and the associated utilities, driveway, garages that were needed for the primary structure or the dwelling on the lots. And then second, in the case of Manchester by the Sea and Rockport, both of them used a quantity approach in terms of ledge removal. And the more that we looked at the quantity approach, we actually took a slightly different view, is that the quantity approach, while it seems kind of neat and metric, unfortunately, it feels in some ways a bit arbitrary, and in other ways it could be potentially difficult for the building inspector to be out there reviewing, has 300 cubic yards been removed, or is the area in a setback area or interior area. So while we appreciate what Manchester by the Sea and Rockport have done, we took a slightly different approach in terms of the actual implementation and moved away from quantity and chose to regulate by use. And I'll explain a little bit more on that. But it was helpful for us to actually, for the first time, look at 2 different bylaws that have successfully managed to protect exposed ledge. So in terms of the rationale for Article 7, this is what the Zoning Bylaw Working Group has proposed. One, that we actually under state law, Mass General Law 41, Section 2117, we have the right to regulate. Second, we have, and you have heard community input that exposed ledge is a unique and defining topographical feature of Cohasset and deserves protection as it relates to community character. Second, third, we did make a promise that we would come back and look at this after research, which we have done. We also believe that given rising land values, that expanded development on existing lots and development of more marginal undeveloped lots will increasingly put pressure as it relates to the removal of exposed ledge. And so we would like to take action now before this moves forward in terms of the impact on the character of Cohasset. And then last but not least, in terms of the actual proposal, what we are proposing here is a regulation of exposed ledge only, by use, not quantity. And what we mean by that is that we're proposing in the bylaw that a special permit process through the planning board be put in place for the removal of exposed ledge face only for structures as defined in the bylaw definitions or accessory buildings to that are not principal to the use of the lot. What we mean by that, and we've illustrated in the bylaw language itself, is fences, sheds, barns, patios, athletic courts, and pools. And very explicitly, as we had seen in the two examples before, exempt activities in terms of what will not be regulated under this bylaw will be the removal of exposed ledge in connection with a principal dwelling, i.e. the house, a garage, which is needed for parking of cars, driveway, sewer system, and utilities. And so that is the rationale for Article 7. And I think I'll pause here and at this point, look for your guidance as whether you'd like to ask questions or hop specifically to the bylaw language themselves.
Thank you. We're about 20 minutes out, so that was, but that was very comprehensive. I think my plan was to see if any members of the advisory committee had any specific questions for you or Lauren, who are going to lose in about 5 minutes, concerning either of these proposed articles, and then moving to votes and discussion on the individual articles. But just to keep things moving while we have folks, do any members of the advisory committee have questions for either Lauren or Katie and or members of her committee? I don't see any, but Fran Collins and then Patrick. Got on mute, Fran.
This zoning change is pretty extensive and very important. And we typically don't have a very big attendance at the special town meeting in the fall. And I'm wondering if this wouldn't be better off to be presented at the annual town meeting in the spring, when we have a much bigger, a much broader audience to ask questions and to peruse the changes. Was that given any thought at all?
So the zoning bylaw working group has given quite a bit of thought to how we're moving forward. And one of the observations that we've shared with the planning board several times is that unfortunately Cohasset does not have an institutional process or memory around how to make zoning changes consistently. And so unfortunately for years and years, Cohasset has been in a reactive, not a proactive mode. And the ultimate test of that is the fact that we really haven't done any comprehensive zoning changes for 35 years. Mm-hmm. So our recommendation is that we begin to chunk away at this task twice annually at special town meeting and annual town meeting. There will be changes that we will batch and will likely be included in a broader, more comprehensive zoning redraft that we're actually asking for funding for and help with a consultant. But these two changes that we're proposing related to ledge, which was a promise follow-up from annual town meeting, and the definitional, which is being asked for by our building inspector as one of the foundational changes, are things that we believe we can do now. And frankly, Cohasset should get in a rhythm of consistently looking at its zoning bylaws. So the answer is no, we haven't done it consistently in the past, but it's something, frankly, that we believe going forward is a practice that the town of Cohasset should develop as a best practice.
Okay, that's an answer to that concern. I know that we received a letter from a member of the planning board raising some, well, dissenting points, one of which was exactly that, that it's a process question, whether special town meeting is the right time for these things. I think it would be appropriate, that I think to some extent, the concept of what should or should not be taken up in any given town meeting cycle is one that comes up with more than just this issue. Chris, do you have any input on, I mean, it seems to me if the people who have the power to make the warrant put something on the warrant, there it is. We could, to Fran's point, we could recommend that it be deferred to annual town meeting if the committee felt strongly about it. But from an overall process viewpoint, we've seen this question a couple of times. This particular question is not suitable to be raised at a special town meeting. Anybody who wants to attend special town meeting can. So, they occur at regular and predictable intervals. But what do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's a decision for all of you, not for me.
I tried to pass the buck. You won't let.
All right. From a process point of view, it's really up to all of you, and this really has been very well vetted. I think it's very clear that zoning is a hot issue for the town. It's been discussed by all the boards. The selectmen have made comprehensive reform a high priority this year. It's one of their top 3 priorities this year. So I think I think it's there's been a lot of public comment. That's what I will share.
Thank you, Peter. I saw your hand. Do you have something?
Could you go to advisory committee first?
Yes, I'm sorry, Patrick. I said I would and I didn't. So yes, Patrick, go ahead.
My question really relates to the timing and commitment that zoning bylaw working group and the planning board and the other boards have to doing this comprehensive zoning review and overview. Has there been any funding that's been secured? How big a project is it? Because it just seems to me that a lot of these incremental changes could have unintended consequences for other sections of the zoning bylaws. So for example, with regard to Article 6, there's redefinitions of ways in a way that makes them qualified and unqualified. Right now, we don't have that. But the town has an overall problem, in my view, a big problem with special public ways versus private ways. And a lot of people live on private ways and don't realize that they're private ways and that they could be subject to all kinds of costs and expense associated with upkeep of those private ways. The town, I think, under state law could even stop plowing private ways, for example. So to me, just the access issue with regard to, for example, private driveways may be a particular zoning issue that can be ticked off with a discrete definitional change the way we have here, but we have a bigger problem, and that is how do we go about evaluating and coming up with a 2021 fix to the problem we have with special ways throughout the town's general bylaws and zoning bylaws. So I'm really interested in knowing about the bigger picture here, when it's going to come down the pike, and how close are we to it? Or are we just going to get every 6 months one little individual change being proposed?
Let me see, given that we're going to lose her very shortly, that whether Lauren has any input to that question.
Thank you. Yes, I'll just state that in terms of the comprehensive zoning bylaw discussion, it's a very pending conversation. We're having a joint meeting next week with various boards to start this conversation. We have, based on our master plan and our zoning bylaw working group, we do have central themes and ideas and goals and strategies that have been identified. But what we're looking to do now is draft a process that'll help us go out to bid so we can get a consultant to professionalize this. This process typically can take anywhere from 12 to 18 months. It is a lengthy undertaking. And it does, of course, require a lot of time and dedication. In terms of the funding, we have some funding that we have allocated from previous consulting lines, but we also are going to special town meeting this year to request additional funding to allow us to do this adequately.
And Patrick, are you interested in the working group's perspective on that question as well?
Yeah, definitely.
Katie, can you weigh in?
Okay. So we have been talking to the planning board since February of this year about the need for a comprehensive zoning bylaw reform. In fact, we worked with the planning department to submit a grant in May. Unfortunately, we did not win that grant, and so we've had to change strategy a little bit in terms of the amount of funding that we've requested for special town meeting. But this has been a conversation that the planning board, master plan, and the zoning bylaw working group have been having for over 6 months now, and it's something that's been in the works that we were looking to bring to fruition. So to sort of answer your question as to whether you're going to continue to see this nibbled at versus a more comprehensive approach. The goal is to take a more comprehensive approach. And we've been working our way up towards that and are now at the point of formally requesting funding to do that. So yes, there is a bigger plan afoot to make sure that when we go about this, we do this in addressing both some reorganization, but also some content as it relates to the needs being addressed by the community. So that's in context of the broader and more comprehensive zoning bylaw changes. In terms of your questions related to ways, I think there's 3 pieces to this. There's a definitional piece, which our planning board, by a vote of 4 to 1, feels is something they need in order to be able to better administer A&Rs and other special permits. I'll let Woody address this from a ZBA perspective, but the definitions we're posing here will help the ZBA perform their job. And while John Howland is not here tonight, he has requested these definitional changes. So those are kind of foundational changes. In your comments, you kind of addressed and touched on 2 other pieces of it that are that are frankly a little bit outside of the bylaws themselves. What we envision happening is that in addition to the definitional changes, which will allow the permitting boards to operate a bit more in line with state law, the planning board has the ability to regulate dimensional and construction aspects as it relates to ways. And they do this in many communities through rules and regulations. We already have those as it relates to common driveways. We already have those in our subdivision private ways. What the planning board, what the definitional change will allow the planning board is to consider whether they want to add anything as it relates to private ways that are non-subdivision standard. And as envisioned so far, the land use issue is really one where new dwellings are being added to private ways, and there's been no consideration for the additional purported use on that private way. And I'll use as an example Ocean Ledge, which maybe not everybody is familiar with, but Ocean Ledge up until 1999 had 4 homes on it. And subsequent to that, another 6 homes have been added with little to no upgrades to that private way, which has resulted in a safety and a privacy, or excuse me, a safety and a construction issues associated with that. And now on top of that, there are additional 2 lots which may be developed. So you've gone from a private way, which back until 1999 had 4 homes on it, up to a private way that has 10 homes on it, and it could have an additional two. Towns like Wellesley have taken the approach that when a private way has a new home being added to it, there is consideration given by the planning board through rules and regulations as to whether that way is adequate or it needs upgrades that are done at the cost of the construction of the new dwelling. So that's the premise there. But again, that is a future step that the planning board could take. But what we're asking for here are just definitional changes that could set that up in the future. And then last but not least, you asked a lot of operational questions as it relates to snow plowing, as it relates to other aspects of private ways. And that is in the jurisdiction of the select board in many ways to address. And the select board has in the past put in place town policies in terms of giving residents on private ways the ability to access betterment funds for repaving. But that, again, to me is an operational consideration that is sort of outside the jurisdiction of what we're talking about from a zoning perspective. But I appreciate that it is an issue that the town of Cohasset has concerns about. So I'll pause there.
Sure, thank you. Back to the, well, first off, Patrick, is that the response?
Yeah, that covers the gamut of, I think, my long question. Thanks.
We don't, as a committee, have a practice of dealing with comments because we never get them, but we have one. So without creating a practice or a policy, I'll just, because it appears to be germane to what was just discussed. Tom Callahan has put a comment in our chat concerning doing this at, as he says, doing this at STM, stating that the development world does not operate on a town meeting schedule. The lack of clear definitions, these areas are recurring issues for us now, and changes are needed now. So that's Tom's perspective, and he further questions from the advisory committee on the effect or import of these. We'll have discussion amongst ourselves in a couple of minutes, but I saw a hand from Mr. Pescator. If you have something to add briefly, would be happy to hear it.
No, Katie, I was going to talk to ways a bit. Katie covered what I was going to say. So
very good. And Mary?
Yeah, just a quick question, which I think you've answered, but I'd just like to clarify. Seems like underlying Patrick's question was, will these changes that you are proposing now, after community input in your research and that have been reviewed by legal counsel, in any way be undone by a more comprehensive review of the zoning bylaws? And it seems that the answer there is no, because these are pretty basic, but I just wanted to clarify that.
So the answer is no. We believe that these are changes that we would carry forward. There are other definitional changes or other changes that and content that are coming, but we don't envision revisiting these. And again, these are foundational from our perspective and needed now in terms of what is occurring from a land use perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Patrick, I see you have an electronic hand up.
Yeah, a second question about Article 7,
Yep.
ledge protection bylaw. I didn't see any standard in the language of the bylaw at all by which the planning board is supposed to be evaluating a special permit or ruling on a special permit. Was any consideration given to putting in some sort of standard, or is it 100% at the planning board's discretion based on the application that's submitted
So,
without any framework?
So the planning board, and this came up at annual town meeting in the spring, has on their to-do list putting in place rules and regulations around how they want to run the special permit process as it relates to land alteration, Article 11. So Article 11 was modified in the spring to add a special permit process for clearing activities. There now is a special permit process for exposed ledge. It is in the hands of the planning board for their best practices to document what the rules and regulations related to that special permit process are. It's something that they do on a regular basis for other categories, but to be honest, the more that they document in terms of rules and regulations for that specific Article 11, the better off they will be. And I'll let Lauren add to that.
Thank you, everyone. And excuse me for the on and off camera. I'm running 2 Zoom meetings at once right now. So
Thank you.
in terms of the planning board rules and regulations, Katie summarized it well. The planning board process for adopting sort of the regulations that would come for this application, they can be done at any time. It doesn't run on a set schedule based on similar to a town meeting. It just requires a public hearing notice and process through state statute, but that is something that could be accomplished within the next 6 months. before the Attorney General review was finalized, should this be passed at town meeting and pursue. So this is something that the planning board commonly does. They have public hearings that they modify their rules and regulations on different items, and this would just be a standard practice that they would ensue following, action on this article. I hope that answers the question.
Any further questions from the advisory committee? Seeing none. Jack, I see you had your hand up. Is there something you'd like to add?
Yes, and thank you very much. And thank you to all you guys on the advisory committee. You've got a tough road to hoe, especially this time of year. Fran and Patrick had some good points. I just want to address that very briefly. We addressed that in the beginning, and one of the issues was, do we triage this? Do we look at things that can be resolved quickly that have some urgency? And so part of it is by defining things and giving the necessary powers for where they should belong is what these two things are about. Because we do envision it will be a long process, but sometimes things need to be done. And as Tom Callahan pointed out, sometimes when wind gets out that things might be done, people may decide to move quickly. So some things, when you decide, you really have to get them done. But these are quite limited, and great thought was given to the process and doing kind of a triage to do that. So that's why we did what we did, and so answer to your questions. Thank you.
Okay. Anything further, or we'll move on to motions on the two articles separately, and if anyone once we have a motion and a second, if anyone on the committee wants to address the committee for a committee discussion, we can. Our guests are welcome to stay, and then we'll move from 6 to 7. So can I have a motion from somebody, whether the let me make sure I get the formulation right, whether the advisory committee votes to recommend Article 6 in the current draft warrant for approval by town meeting.
I'll move that the advisory committee recommends Article 6 to the special town meeting.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you for the better formulation. Any discussion among members of the advisory committee in addition to what we've just done? Seeing none, we'll vote by roll call. Gina Stino. Muted.
Gina Stino, aye.
Thank you. Fran Collins.
Oh,
No. Patrick Kennedy.
Patrick Kennedy, aye.
Mark Maggi.
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick.
Aye.
Meg Wheeler.
Aye.
And Rob Hillman is an aye. So it's recommended by a vote of 6 to 1. Yes. Very well. So moving on then to
Could I ask who
Articles.
seconded that motion?
Mary,
who's Mary?
Thanks.
Moving on to Article 7. Can I have a motion?
I move that the advisory committee recommends Article 7 to special town meeting.
I second.
Any further discussion? Fran, did you seconded?
Yes.
Okay, so it's Meg and Fran. Any further discussion as it relates to Article 7? For myself, I think that there's a lot of, there may be a lot to discuss about ledge and ledge protection, but I think the other boards have done that comprehensively. So, and they put I don't think there's any wording quibbles over this. So unless anybody has anything further, I'll put it to a vote. Seeing nothing, on the motion on Article 7, Gina Stino.
Aye.
Fran Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Patrick Kennedy, aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman, MNI as well. So thanks to the working group. Katie, I think you've got to adjourn your meeting.
Yes, thank you for that. So I'd like to adjourn the zoning bylaw working group at 7:57. Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye, Katie Dugan.
Hi, Woody Chidick.
Jack Creighton, aye. Jack Creighton, aye.
Peter Pescatori, aye.
Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good
all.
evening.
Thank you all. Yep. Good night.
Night.
Good night, all.
Okay. Backing up then to take the warrant in the order of the articles presented. Chris, I understand that we don't have anything on which to vote for Article 5 yet, or do we?
We do,
But
actually.
we do. Okay, so we do. Do you want to, everybody turn their attention to Article 5, capital improvement projects? It appears to be defibrillators and water main replacement. Chris, you want to walk us through those?
I will. Okay, hold on a second, let me put it up on the screen.
No, it was the CBC that we don't have anything. to do.
Yes, correct. Okay. Are we seeing the warrant? Article 5 is the capital article. There are two projects in there. Replacement of, I think we've talked about these in the past, the replacement of defibrillators. This is being accelerated to now rather than the spring, because if we get them, if we turn in the old ones by December 30th, we get a credit on each one of like $700. So it's worth a decent amount of money to us. I think it's 700. It's several $1,000s that we get as credit if we do it by December, then in December. The Elm Street water main replacement is an extension piece. There was a little extra piece, and I have Jason
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Federico available if anyone has any detailed questions. It's that work, as I think as anyone has seen who's driven or lives in that area, is underway. This is an extra piece at the end that goes up on margin that will complete a link of new pipe that will go all the way up towards Atlantic. So and Capital reviewed them both, and they recommended by a vote of 4-0 them to town meeting. And to you.
Very good. Does anyone have any questions for Chris regarding these two capital expenditures?
No.
I, for one, am massively in favor of defibrillators. I think I'm their intended beneficiary, so.
Patrick has his hand.
Oh, Patrick, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, when it says the $150,000 for the Elm Street water main infrastructure cost comes out of water retained earnings, what's the current financial condition of the water department's balance sheet, and how much of the retained earnings do they have that are available to be spent right away on this?
They're actually in pretty good shape right now.
Okay.
I don't have their retained earnings. I'm getting texted.
But it's not going to drain the coffers.
No. I'm told that the retained earnings are about $1.4 million right now, so there's plenty of money.
Okay.
And this is better than to pay for this in cash. And again, this is a conservative estimate because there's a concern there might be some ledge in there when they have to do the pipe replacement. It may come in less. So.
Anything else? All right. Then can I have a motion regarding a recommendation for Article 5?
Patrick Kennedy moves to recommend approval of Article 5 items to town meeting.
Second.
Okay, Fran seconds. Any further discussion? No? All right. To a vote then, Gina Stino,
Aye.
Fran Collins.
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Let's get those new defibrillators. Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
And Rob Hillman is also an aye. So that is Article 5. We've done 6 and 7. Article 8 is CPC, and there is nothing for us to vote on. Chris, do you want to just give us a quick description of the status of CPC?
So CPC, with the weather and everything, they're meeting tomorrow night. There's one project that's being put in front of them by the town. It's to replace stairs from Bancroft Way, which I understand from Rob was an Eagle project once upon a time. Unfortunately, the stairs are in need of replacement at this point, and it's a safety issue. So we're going to look to replace them with concrete stairs, and so that presentation will be made tomorrow. It's about $18,000. So they're precast; they go right in, and they have railings. So that'll hopefully last for a good length of time. I understand there might be something presented for Sandy Beach for handicap accessible sea wheelchairs that'll allow folks who are handicapped to get down, not just towards the edge of the water, but into the water. They'll hear that tomorrow. So if that comes back, you'll hear those. You got to get them after the warrant closes. So you might want to have a meeting at some point in the next month to look at any lingering items, which would be this one. So those are what I'm aware of at the moment on those. Then there are 2 others. So one, as Rob mentioned, the acquisition of land by donation has been pulled because the title is a little cloudy. Apparently it's been passed along a couple of generations, and there's some trusts, and the town's tax title attorney was concerned. And so council, it's been pulled. And if there's clarity on the ownership, the town is more than happy to accept the land. It's not ready yet. And there's 2 others. I have them both up. So the first is a field lease authorization.
Chris, can I just make sure I understand what you just discussed? In the document that I'm looking at, there was an Article 10 exchange of easements for the Parker Avenue boat ramp.
Yes.
Is that the one that's being pulled?
No. That's new.
Okay.
Yeah. No. That's
So why don't, can we do this? Can we, I think the field lease authorization and the citizens petition are kind of related, aren't they? Or they're at least on the same topic?
We're on the same topic. Well, kind of on the same. They're on the same piece of land.
Okay, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do the exchange of easements first, and then we can do the other 2
Okay.
together? Does that work for you?
Right. Yeah, that's fine. So Parker Ave boat ramp, the town has been going through the process of reconstructing that. We won a nice big grant. Went out to bid. The bids are being awarded. It turns out that the boat ramp has historically sat on some of land that's actually owned by the marina, and the marina has crossed town land to access it. And there's also, I guess, might be some buffering plantings that are also on town land that the marina maintains. So as part of this, it's kind of, I call this kind of housekeeping because it kind of is, but it's also legally important. So since we've now identified this as part of the planning process, this would grant the town an easement on land owned by the marina, and grant the marina an easement on land owned by the town, just for mostly for access. Though there may be, again, they may want to maintain some plantings that have historically been there too. So this just authorizes the select board to do those. It gives the select board the power to do those. And since we're actually looking to build this and do this construction now, this is a very timely matter. So, questions for me?
Anything?
I think we should move to accept number 10.
Okay.
Can I ask a question before we get there?
Certainly.
Is this just a preliminary authorization by town meeting to the select board to enter into negotiations, or has there already been discussions with the owner of the marina about exchanging these easements?
Yeah, there have been discussions, and it's been identified that this needs to happen. But
Okay.
this gives the select board the power to have council, hammer out specific details. There are some maps with this that show the land, which I don't have in front of me tonight, but that we could share, obviously. but what this does, Patrick, it gives the select board the authorization to then finalize an actual exchange of easements.
Is it anticipated that this is a cash-free
Yes.
exchange of easements?
Yeah, so the town gets one and they get one that are they're effectively reciprocal. And again, they've for all intents and purposes existed for a long time anyway, because that's just the way it's been done. But this makes it all legally clean. Particularly using state grant money and everything, and we got a new Chapter 91 license. So
Right.
we need to dot the i's across the t's this time.
Anything else? Very well, then a motion, I think, or Fran, did you start to move? You moved.
I did, yeah. I moved that we accept Article 10.
Patrick Kennedy
So-
seconds.
Okay, Patrick seconds. Any further discussion? No, so a roll call vote. Gina Sino,
Aye.
Fran Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman is an aye, which takes care of 10. So now we have Articles 9, field lease article, and Article 11, which is a citizen's petition. Chris, you want to start with the field lease article? And
Sure. So there's been an ongoing. So one of the things that we've been slowly trying to do is just kind of clean things up a little bit. It turns out that while the Little League has been there for many years, there's no formal agreement for use there, and there's been some conversations about which is the subject of Article 11, some upgrades and things to the fields. The select board wants to formalize this, and no one's looking to not have the little, no one's uncomfortable with the Little League having baseball there. This is, again, to some extent, a housekeeping article in the sense that it formally empowers the select board to enter into a lease for the property for a period for up to 10 years with potential to renew after that. The challenge here again is that there's no agreement. We did some research. The towns own this land for at least a century. It's highly unlikely that it was acquired for baseball fields.
Yeah.
Unless Fran knows something more than I do, but I don't think this land was acquired for baseball fields. So I don't know what was there in the past. So this would formally, even though the select board technically has jurisdiction over it, we think this formally transfers it into the select board's hands for the power, for the purpose of being able to lease it for, in this case, it's going to be for baseball.
The two new fields where the town sand pit was, and down and back there is where we used to dump the snow. We cleaned up town after big snowstorms. So that's the history.
I've heard about that. Carlos complained to me repeatedly about how they took away his place to store snow.
There it was.
The front lot has been there for a long time, and
Yes.
and that's been a baseball field, I think, for a very long time.
Yeah.
So this just allows this to get cleaner. It empowers the select board to enter into a lease. There's more process that has to come after this. That said, it cleans up, it cleans the way and allows for, formal things to get done properly. Does that make some sense?
well, it does, and it probably will also clear up who should be carrying what sort of insurance.
Who are we leasing it to?
Well, we're not right now. It's not being leased to anybody, right? But the Little League has been using it for years, not illegally. I mean, with permission. The problem is that it's not been formally done. There's no licenses, there's no permits. It's just been a kind of that's accepted tradition. Again, no one is objecting to it. It just as part of conversations that happened earlier in the year about potential upgrades of the field. We dug in. Well, what does the lease say? Well, there is no lease. There's no license. There's nothing. This is not
But by giving the select board authority to lease the field, could they lease it to somebody else? Does this open it up to some sort of competition that we don't want to do?
Well, so the short answer to that is there is a process at the same time. So there has to be a public, the town meeting can't direct the select board to lease to any particular people. That's not legal. At the same time, Mark, I think everyone understands that these fields belong in Cohasset and should be used by Cohasset residents primarily, which is what they are, unless there's visiting teams coming to play. And I think that's the goal. That there still has to be a process to go through, and I've been warned by council that we have to be, be careful about putting our thumb too hard on the scale. At the same time, there's no intent to do anything other than to formalize in a clean way what's already happening. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I'm trying to be lawyerly in my answer.
No, I understand. So yes, you're
I have
clarifying
one quick,
as much as you're allowed to clarify, but you could understand why people might be wondering why this is being, like, at some point, does precedent become policy, and people are going to be wondering why this is being.
Yeah. Again, this is spurred by the conversation that happened early in the year, and again, the citizens petition. This formally allows the select board to actually do something, right? Which the citizen petition does not, but we'll get to that in a second. So,
one quick thing, and then Jean, I think Fran's question was, to whom is it contemplated to be leased? And I assume the answer to that is the CYBSA.
Well, we still have that. To Mark's point, there is going to have to be a process. If you remember the whole thing with the senior center, we have to go through a process. If you're leasing something, you have to go through a process. I think there's an expectation that, there's no intent to change the use from baseball fields. And there's not an expectation that there's any interest other than the current leasee, or the current user, I should say, because I don't know leasee.
But there has to be a procurement
Has to
process.
be a procurement process, right?
Okay.
But that said, the procurement process will focus on the needs of the town, the current use, and the tradition, and all of that. So,
Okay. Jean?
Does this procurement process involve exchanging funds? Or would it be a handshake goodwill kind of?
Well, so the town could accept, again, that would be part of the process, right? Would be the town could accept, in-kind services, field maintenance, equipment, stuff like that, potentially. That said, there's that's still down the road. This just kind of just opens the door. Then there's a road to go down, Gene. So the short answer is that's possible. Yeah, I don't. Again, there's no money changing hands now.
Okay, you know why I'm asking, because there are other fields that do get leased.
Well, the other fields are actually, that's one of the things that's kind of weird. Milliken is actually permitted, okay, and Beechwood is permitted because Rec manages them, but these fields have never been that way. These fields have always just been kind of maintained by CYBSA and its predecessor organizations. So
It's just formalizing those arrangements.
yeah, and again, there would have to be, there have to be further discussion how to formalize that, right? And there's been a lot of investment made into those fields. I think it's clear. Some of it's been CPC, some of it's there's a lot of private money that's gone into that. But that's what this process allows to happen, which right now technically couldn't even happen if the board wanted to, because it's not clean, the board's ability to lease.
Fran?
Who's maintaining the physical plant there now, mowing the grass and keeping the fences up? And
So the town mows the grass.
that's what I thought.
The town mows the grass. The CYBSA though do a lot of, they roll the infield, they maintain the fences, they do all the nice stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot of the little league moms and dads doing it.
Yeah. So the town does the bulk work, of mowing, but the fine work that makes them little league fields is that, as Mark points out, is actually, I think you all get assignments, don't you, Mark? You all actually have to do work. So, or you volunteer, or you're assigned volunteers.
Yeah, just a volunteer, whatever you want to call it. If you're coaching and you got the first game and the field has puddles, you're the one rigging up the puddles. But you can understand how this would have some level of concern for folks that, like, are we opening this up to something where it could somehow be taken away from CYBSA if a private baseball or softball company comes in and says, we'll keep them as baseball fields and we'll throw the town $100,000, but we're going to operate a private little league out of there and make our money back. And now it's out of the town's hands. Are we opening this up to something where we could potentially lose control of it? Would be the concern.
You're right, and that's a legitimate question, and there's no intent for that to happen, right?
I think practically, I'm sorry, Chris, but I mean, practically, someone is going to draft the RFP. And the RFP, if it's drafted appropriately, will say a nonprofit that provides recreational opportunities, baseball, softball, et cetera. It'll be drafted in a way that wouldn't permit a private company to come in and turn it into a profit-making enterprise. And the town has some flexibility in procurement to do, to make choices. They don't necessarily have to, they don't necessarily have to select on one criteria. I mean, that's very broadly speaking and subject to correction by any procurement lawyer who's out there listening. But that's my understanding, and I've done it. Sorry, Chris, I cut you off, but
No, that's you explained it in a nice lawyerly way, and that's correct. So Mark, that is exactly the plan here, is to have an RFP that's co-asset centric. That said, we still have to go through, I'm sorry, at least it's an RFP. We have to do this though cleanly, right? And we can't say it's only going to CYBSA, because that would be that said, the intent is to have it local and to maintain the same, access to kids at the local level, the same kind of role that people have been playing for a long time, and just to make it legal.
Fran?
Yeah, I totally understand, and I trust our elected officials, especially with the use of town land. I'm trying to kind of get the concerns that might come our way out in the public, so we're not caught off guard by it.
No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you sharing that too. I mean, there has been conversations when this article was proposed by the board a few weeks back. There were conversations, so everyone understood what the point of this was. It wasn't trying to scare anybody or change anything. It was actually, again, a little bit like what we just did with the boat ramp. It's like, whoop, we kind of have to clean this up, don't we? Let's do this. And the select board actually proposed. This is a select board article proposed. So I think
Fran?
Yeah,
he does.
I don't really have an issue with with what the proposal is, but my only concerns is that I'd like to say, let sleeping dogs lie, but obviously you can't do that. But if we enter into a legal document that says you are the lessee and you are the lessor, who I'm responsible for this and you're responsible. Yes, but I thought and you thought, he said, and then we get into this bullshit, this stuff back and forth as to who is supposed to do what and who's going to pay for what. So, I mean, there are a lot of I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed. I think it's a great idea, but I mean, if we have to do it, but boy, there's an awful lot of oh my God, why didn't we think of that?
Believe me, I fully appreciate that. We've had those conversations. So there's nothing more painful than trying to put into writing established tradition.
A long time ago, I wrote the agreement between the town and the local cable television provider. And it's the same thing. You had to go to bid. You set up a set of criteria that makes sure that it's a town-related entity that has it. And then Fran's absolutely right. You got to think of a bunch of things, write them correctly, but that's eminently doable. And as opposed to it's neither fish nor fowl situation that they have right now. It seems to make sense. Who's the initial proponent of this article? Where did it come from?
The select board.
Okay.
Again, there was a conversation in the spring, if you all recall, about lights, the CYBSA putting lights up at the field, and it's kind of stopped, and the conversation since continued, and during all of these conversations, it became clear that that there wasn't a legal framework for the use, even though it was an established tradition, and then new council said, well, we could do these various things, and if there's going to be further investment, again, CYBSA has made a lot of investments in those fields. It makes sense. The better answers seem to allow for the board to, if there's going to be continued significant investments made into the fields, the best way to ensure that the use of them is protected would be to have a lease that extends for some period of time, as opposed
Will
to.
there be any money exchanged?
Again, that depends on that's for a conversation to come. Again, it's very well possible that that the answer is that ongoing maintenance and investments might cover it, right?
That would make sense.
Right. Rather than have the town spend money on X, they do it instead. I mean, then that would be the same as having rent, right? And I think that's a very possible outcome, though that would depend on how things go.
Have the selectmen or anyone else in connection with this this article received any comment from the CYBSA board?
Well, I know it's circulated to them, at least informally, and also to the neighbors. So no one thought there was some kind of crazy and run going around on anybody. So the reaction so far has been calm. So
Okay, but there's no letter that we should see from the CYSA board
Not that-
saying,
no, not that I'm
Well,
aware.
well, I mean, yeah, I assume that if there had been one, you'd have seen it.
There's been a lot of conversation with the board, again, as Fran said, letting sleeping dog lives would be great. Unfortunately, we can't anymore. It's like, I found out some time ago about another program and I asked about something and it turned out we needed a license for something. It turns out we didn't have. Well, the program still runs in a different way that's totally legal now. So that, the goal is not to not have the program, it's to do it it's to make sure that no one gets in trouble unintentionally, right? So, and in this case, the goal is to get the goal is to keep having high quality, baseball, softball opportunities for young kids run locally and just have all the I's dotted and T's crossed the right way.
okay.
I have one other question.
Sure, did I see Mary's hand going up first? Okay, then Fran.
If we lease these 3 fields to the Little League folks, does that exclude anybody else from using them?
It
Depends
depends.
on what the lease says.
Yeah, it depends. It depends. And when I say that, I mean, can people go there and throw the ball around, with their kids? Yeah, I don't think anyone particularly objects to that. I don't know that we want a beer league softball, to show up from, Dorchester and start playing and, I don't think not that there's anything wrong with beer league softball. Just, I don't think people would be very excited about that. So no, there's no intent. Again, I think the goal is to preserve what's happening, right? And by the way, the other thing, Fran, is that there's an ongoing field study going on about, are there other, does the town have enough fields? If not, where can we put more? And how can we, get more access for kids and adults, whether it be baseball or field hockey or soccer or pickleball, whatever, the town does not have a lot of land. What do we do? How can we maximize those opportunities for folks? That study's going on now too.
Well, those fields are set up exclusively for Little League, this size for Little League type competition, but I'm just curious if that would be.
You can actually play. You could play football in a full-sized outfield, and again, Milliken, right? The outfield is also used for soccer, right? I mean, the infield is the infield, but the rest of Milliken is used for soccer and field hockey and lacrosse. The Little League field is really just a little. I mean, they're Little League and they're softball, right?
Right.
That's what they are. They're not. And I don't expect them to be anything else.
All right.
At least not for the long term.
Any further questions? Then why don't we get a motion? Does anyone want to move Article 9?
I move that we vote to accept Article 9.
Okay. Patrick, if you could put that in the form
Patrick
of,
Kennedy, second.
that the advisory committee votes to recommend Article 9 to town meeting for approval, however Meg said it. That was the best formulation of the evening. Mary, you had did I see a hand?
I just wanted to correct the language there. That's all, but you did it.
Move to recommend Article 3 to special town meeting.
Okay. In the form finally determined, what is everybody prepared to vote then? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, by roll call, Gina Stino,
Aye.
Fran Collins.
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman is an aye. So that brings us to the last part of the warrant review, which is the citizens petition, Article 11 in the document that was just sent around.
So this is effectively just a sense of the meeting. It doesn't direct town meeting because it can't. Town meeting can't be direct. Town meeting doesn't have the authority to accept gifts or direct the acceptance of gifts or any of that. What this really is a an effort, a sense of the meeting, I guess the best way I could put it, right? Like if you adopt a resolution in support of something, it doesn't mean you're actually doing it. It's in support of the concept. So it doesn't take any action. It just expresses an opinion of the meeting. And that's in conversations with the proponents and also with town council. The language may seem a little more direct, but it can't. It simply recommends that the town consider these things. The select board is the only place the select board can accept gifts. The select board can, again, through a lease, authorize lights or anything else. So the Article 9 gives the select board clear authority. If this is approved, this just says, we think this is a great idea, and that's all it is. So since it's not really taking action, it's really just expressing an opinion of the meeting. Whether you want to opine on it or not is up to you. It's not an action, really. It's an expression of, interest, I guess.
It seems to me that if it's a sense of the meeting vote, I'm leaving completely aside the merits of it, whether it's even appropriate that we recommend to a town meeting what its sense is kind of a question about what is it that we're here to do. I suppose we can, there's no harm in it, but I don't know what anyone else thinks of that, or Chris, whether these things are generally something that the boards vote on. Do you expect, for example, the select board to? They probably shouldn't.
I don't expect the select board to vote on it, actually. And this is the first one of its kind in the 8 years I've been here. There haven't been any sense of the meetings ones before. And part of it is because there was conversation about what the town meeting has the authority to do and not. And town council was like, the select board does leases and the select board accepts gifts. The town meeting can't do those things. Local government in Massachusetts is complicated. And town meeting is the legislative body. The select board is the executive body on these kinds of things. So that said, the citizens went ahead and did it, and they have the absolute right to do that. And so long as it's just a sense of the meeting, then it's okay. If it was a directive, at least that's what council had said, if the article was the select board shall do this, it would have been ruled out of order and unable to be heard. So if it's just a sense of the meeting saying we think this is a great idea, it's okay. And
my initial reaction to it is that maybe the advisory committee should make a statement to that effect, that this is to get the sense of the meeting, and each one of us has our own sense of how this ought to go. But as a body, we don't feel like we should. I just, maybe it's a little too theoretical, but this idea that we should be recommending to people what their sense is. I guess on the other hand, we may do that with every article, but just throw that out there. Does anybody else have any questions for Chris or comments? Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Rob, here on this one. I feel like it's wonderful if we all hold up a piece of paper as a citizen of Cohasset, but I don't know that the board has any place in this instance, really. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, I personally have an opinion about it, and I know how I would vote for my sense. And I would make it clear that by not taking a position, the advisory committee isn't expressing any sort of opposition to it. It's not really for us to say, unless somebody thinks otherwise.
It just seems to me that there's so many issues embedded within this petition. For example, you could have the neighborhood or the neighbors, come up with their own citizens petition that addresses their concerns with it. I don't think we should be, whatever action we take, I don't think we should do anything that encourages this type of citizens petition being brought before town meeting as a general matter. It's rarely done. as Chris pointed out, he said never in 8 years that he's been here. Has he seen it before? I just don't think it's, I don't think it's a good use of town meeting time, quite frankly. There's so many issues here. There's use issues, there's potential zoning issues. There's like, I don't know. I wouldn't want to encourage this type of citizens petition. That's my view of it.
I have a memory of at least one, maybe more of these in the 10 or 15 years ago timeframe. And I think those were articles that were failing and were the moderator just converted into a sense of the meeting matter. But yeah, I mean, if there hasn't been one for 8 years, I take your point. Fran, I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
No.
Okay. I'm going to recommend that we move as a body to abstain with a brief statement that says our abstention should be, not to be construed as opposition or favor. It's just each one of us will vote as individuals, but not as an advisory committee.
Good.
Does anybody want to run with that one, or?
No, I would agree with you. I have my own opinions about the whole thing, and a lot of them that Patrick just voiced. There's a whole lot of issues there, and just for one thing, I noticed all the signatories for this petition all live in Ledgewood. They couldn't be any further away from those lights unless they moved to Situate. So there are a lot of issues. So I agree with you, Rob.
I'm in favor of that.
Okay, then would somebody move that the advisory committee votes to abstain from a position on Article 11, and we'll make a statement to the effect that abstention should be construed as neither an endorsement or an opposition, but that each one of us will cast our vote as individuals.
So moved.
Thank you, Jean. Second.
Patrick Kennedy, second.
Thank you. All right. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, go to a vote. Jean Estino,
Aye.
Fran Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
and I am an aye as well. So,
If someone kind of give me what your statement is, you don't have to do it now, but just some.
yeah, no, we'll give it, I'll draft something up beforehand. I kind of anticipated making the statement myself, on behalf of the committee.
Okay.
Generally, with respect to these articles, we really haven't had this conversation, but I'm not sure how many of them anybody needs to stand up and articulate a position on. I know that the moderator isn't particularly interested in having all the committees come up and weigh in, even to just, if we've recommended it, our vote is printed in the warrant that's in front of the people at the meeting. So we don't need to stand up and say that we did what we did, unless there is any article that somebody who is particularly interested in it, or is a liaison or something, wants to say a few words, we can talk about that. Typically, there's a few words at the annual town meeting, particularly about the budget, because it just seems wrong to spend $45 million without saying something. So does anybody have any other thoughts about that? I think at this meeting, the last special town meeting I attended, I recall my son, who's a bit of a government guy, decided to come because he could vote. He was there, and it took longer to get a quorum than it did to pass everything on the warrant. So, and we got a quorum relatively quickly. So I don't think we need to necessarily go on that way. Let me get the agenda back in front of me. Pardon me for a second. There we go. Liaison reports and discussions. I think that those have largely been embedded in the discussions of the warrant articles. Does anybody have anything else they want to say? Mary?
Yes, just one thing. I just forwarded to the committee, I got an email from Susan Owen, and she only sent it to myself and Helene, who is obviously no longer on the committee, about a facilities walkthrough that is happening on November 16th. So you'll find that in your inbox. It could be useful. They use this as a tool just to educate other boards and committees before they make their capital requests. And I don't know, I will follow up because we had a brief conversation last time about the school facilities committee being a separate entity from the school committee. And I don't know if this walkthrough will involve any of their work or not, but just so you all know, I will not be able to attend. I'm not going to be in town, but if somebody else could, they should just email her back.
What's the date, Mary?
November 16,
16th.
and you do have an email in your box.
Okay. That, anything else from liaisons, other committees, et cetera? Super. All right. Next item is approval of minutes. There was a set of minutes distributed prior to the meeting by email. I don't know whether we can get those on the screen or if we need to. Why don't I take a motion to approve them, and then we can have a discussion and decide if anybody needs them separately. I have them available on
I think they're all good.
my on screen. So
I'll make
Patrick.
a motion to approve the minutes of October 13th.
Second.
Okay, Mary and Fran, any discussion of those minutes? I wasn't there, so I can't even vote on them. Nothing? Everybody's content? Okay, there's been a motion and a second. We'll vote by roll call. Gina Stino,
Aye.
Fran Collins,
All right.
Patrick Kennedy. Muted. I'm going to assume you assent. I
Sorry,
think that would be the easiest assumption of the night. Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Meg Wheeler,
I wasn't there, so I'm abstaining.
and I too need to abstain. So we're adopted 4-5 to 0 to 2. So in terms of matters not anticipated, we do have an applicant for our last open spot, and the committee that is for some reason called the Troika. Why we name committees after Russian sleds is beyond me, but there you go. We're all appointed by it, and that committee will meet and take up an application from an enthusiastic and talented citizen. And with any luck, that person will be with us at our next meeting. And for the first time in a long, long time, this committee will be fully staffed, which is great. We should think about which liaison assignments are the least attractive so that we can break them off and give them to the new person. That is the tradition. I don't know. But absent that, I think that, check my.
Can I ask this applicant's name? FYI or FYS?
Yeah, I think it's Adam Ammon. You might have noticed me trying to avoid saying his name because I didn't quite remember how to pronounce his last name, which is kind of a problem I've been evidencing quite a lot of. He had been an applicant early in the process and had expressed a renewed interest, and with we finally were able to bring it forward, and Kerry and Dan Evans and I are going to meet on Friday. But he's been interviewed and he's very enthusiastic, has I think can be a sound member. And so hopefully that doesn't bring any strong objections, Patrick. It's he seems like a great guy, so I'm looking forward to it. And he was strongly recommended by the chair of the select board, which not that that's determinative in any way, but it's a good endorsement. So, which brings us to I suppose that was a topic not reasonably anticipated within 48 hours, because I think we just posted that meeting. And then that brings us to adjournment, unless there's anything that I overlooked that fits into the open meeting provisions of what we do. Mary, next
Do we
meeting
want to,
perhaps?
yes.
Yeah.
And
That would make
I would just ask if it's possible maybe to set the next few, given that we're coming up to holidays and crazy land.
I think that makes sense. So special town meeting is on December 13th. And so, that's a ways from now, although there are some holiday weekends in there. We want to have a meeting between now and special town meeting to maybe, talk maybe more generally about, or maybe we put one on the books and see if we can develop an agenda that's worth doing. Jean?
You do have one noted in the minutes for November 10th.
But it was November 1st, wasn't it? Or December 1st. Oh, excuse me, you're right, you're right.
No, a meeting.
Yeah, right, yep.
My recollection was that was if we did not finish the discussion on the warrant articles.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, that was a placeholder. I
A
think.
placeholder. Okay.
So,
Not that I'm dying to meet again next week or anything, but just saying.
Not that I mind, but I don't know, when, there's, the budget process is probably starting soon if it hasn't started already, Chris. Is that how, are the departments begin to roll up budgets, or?
The capital's in full swing. The operating budget starts a little bit later this month, early December, and that gets all rolled up in January. When we present the budget, January 18th is the current date to present the first draft of the FY23 budget.
I wonder whether we don't put a meeting on the books for sometime in, say, early December or
Either the
late November, and
Either the 1st or the 8th would be about with the Wednesdays.
yeah, the first is and I'm one of, hopefully by that point, 9, so it shouldn't be determinative. I'm absolutely conflicted that night. I've got something I can't move, but we could put one on for the first. You want to put, Mary?
I'm also not available the 1st, neither is Patrick.
So why don't we book a meeting for the 8th, and I'll work with Mary about seeing if we can, and Chris and Don, and see if there's a meaningful agenda we can put together. And obviously, if anybody has any suggestions for agenda items, they should send them. And sometime around the prior week, we'll either circulate an agenda, or if we just don't think that there's an opportunity to have maybe a slightly higher level discussion about what we want to do as a committee going into the and staying on top of the roll up of the articles, particularly the budget for the annual town meeting, as well as paying some attention to some of the other broader issues that we should occasionally take a look at, like long-term capital planning and other major projects that are going to impinge on the budget over the course of years and decade, rather than just what's at the next meeting. Does that make sense? And if there isn't enough to do, we won't do it. I don't want to waste anybody's time either. Yes, no, maybe?
Are you interested at all in maybe, we talked the last meeting when you were traveling about having the school facilities committee come before us
That'd be a good opportunity.
and just lay out. It might, hopefully it wouldn't be too frenetic a time. I would rather kind of get a lay of the land from them before we get into kind of all the departments and their budgets and so forth. That's an
I think
idea.
that makes lots of sense. We've got the time. It's they're it's a committee that's out there working on, major analysis. Can you contact somebody, Mary, and see if we could get a representative or a group from that committee to come in?
Yep.
And then maybe we can use that as a primary agenda item and layer in some things around it if people find it useful. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Fran?
Yeah, I hear a lot of comments around town that this school facilities committee is planning to build a new school. So that's not what I understand the charge was, but that seems to be the popular
Well,
rumor. So
We'll give them an opportunity to let us know.
terrific.
We're here to be, it's within the charge of the advisory committee. And I'm not suggesting that we, micromanage them or impinge on their charge or anything else, but I think it's certainly fair to say, come on in and, let us know where things are at. Chris, does that sound?
Yeah, and by the way, they're not planning to build, they're investigating the school facilities.
Yeah, that's what you told me the last time, but since then I've heard I had an old seaman one time, he said, what's the latest rumor? Don't give me the facts, man. I want the latest rumor.
Well, I don't traffic in rumors, so I'm sure they'd be happy to meet. So the totally off site on that. Did any of you get, if I might, just for a second, digress, November 22nd? Have you gotten the evite yet? Any of you for the board and committee recognition night? If any of you are available, that would be great. This is the first time the select board has wanted to do this for a while. Select member Kennedy in particular has been very gung-ho, and so we're finally having it in fruition. The town has done an employee recognition night that week on Tuesday, so we decided let's do the boards committees on Monday. I know it's Thanksgiving week, I know it's a tough time, but it's just some desserts and some coffee and a chance to say hello and thank everybody. So if you can make it that night, that's great. Bring your spouse or whoever, and if you want, and it's at Wilco Commons. So I use the evite to RSVP or just let Justine Hunt know if you're coming, because we want to have some idea how many people are actually going to come. So, or are able. So, well, thank you.
Mary?
I just have a general question that I'm assuming we can talk about in open meeting. Does anyone have any sense, or are we allowed to have a sense about where they are with the contract negotiations on the school side? No and no.
I have no idea. I literally have no idea. So
I think it's something that, we can't have any we don't have anything posted for that. So we couldn't have a substantive discussion of it. We could, however, schedule an executive session for that meeting and ask that, we get an update. Contract, collective bargaining agreement negotiations fall under exceptions, the executive session provisions, of the open meeting law. And, since that is biggest single expense line in the town budget every year, I think it's well for us to know where things are at. So what we can know about the internals of the negotiations is a different question, but that's one we can undertake in executive session.
Okay, if that's something that would be appropriate to do on the 8th, I would certainly be interested in that. If it's not, I'm sure you know.
At least an update on there's certain aspects of it that are public that we could know. The other aspects of it, perhaps not. So we'll get advice of counsel if we need to. And since we're in an open session right now, I think I could say out loud, we will do everything exactly in accordance with the applicable statutes, which we will anyhow. So.
You did last year have us both in for conversations. So
we did.
So if you want to,
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I do too.
In terms of budget impact, there's almost no bigger event. So we can put that down on that agenda. That's going to become an interesting meeting. That's good. Anything else? Okay, then anyone want to move to adjourn?
So moved.
Second,
Second, Jean. Once again, a roll call vote. Gina Stino,
aye.
Fran Collins,
Aye.
Patrick Kennedy,
Aye.
Mark Maggi,
Aye.
Mary McGoldrick,
Aye.
Meg Wheeler,
Aye.
and Rob Hillman is an aye. We are adjourned at 8:52.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks.
Rob.
It's good to see you all.
Thank you.
Chris, what's the plan for